Hey guys, welcome back to Science. Today we're going to be covering the circulatory system. My name's Mr. Lead, in case you forgot. I got my blood red shirt on today just to be more thematic. Yeah, let's get going. So, the circulatory system is responsible for moving blood around the body. I've mentioned this before, but its job of moving blood around the body holds a few different purposes. I mentioned in the last time that it's one of its purposes was to move oxygen around the body, but it's got a few more purposes than that. And these are all the purposes I want you to remember. It not only carries oxygen, it also carries nutrients. Both things are needed for cellular respiration, remember. It also carries carbon dioxide away from the cells and back to the lungs. It also carries waste from the kidneys, to the kidneys rather. It carries waste to the kidneys. And it's also got the job of spreading heat around the body. So the circulatory system is made up of our heart, and it's also made up of blood vessels and blood. So by the end of this lesson, I want you guys to understand those three things. I want you to understand the different types of blood vessels. I want you to understand the heart and what it's made of and all its different components. And you also to understand what blood is made of. So let's jump into it. Blood vessels. There are three different types of blood vessels. We got arteries, capillaries, and veins. Now, a lot of people think the difference between arteries and veins is that arteries have oxygenated blood and veins have deoxygenated blood. Now, that is not 100% true. Okay, the definition of an artery is a blood vessel that carries blood from the heart. All right, remember that. Arteries go away from the heart, and veins go to the heart. Okay, it's not about whether it's got oxygenated blood or not, and we'll talk about why later. But that is the difference. The other difference between arteries and veins is that veins have a lot lower blood pressure, while arteries have much higher blood pressure. So that is why it's so much more dangerous if you cut an artery, whereas if you cut a vein. If you cut a vein, because the blood pressure is low, it will just bleed. It will just slowly bleed out. Whereas if you cut an artery, because there's so much blood pressure, you'll see the blood splurting out. And you've got to stop that and clog that artery as much as possible. And capillaries are the gateway between arteries and veins. They're where you see the gas exchange happen. They're where you see... So capillaries are linked to the alveoli in the lungs, but they're also linked to all the different parts of the body and help provide oxygen and all the different types of nutrients everywhere in the body. So this is what they look like in a diagram. So these are the capillaries. The vein heads towards the heart, and the artery goes away from the heart. It's not about oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. Veins go towards the heart, arteries go away from the heart, okay? And here's what blood looks like, a blood vessel looks like with its muscles around it. The muscles help push the blood down the blood vessel, okay? Bruises, what bruises are, these are a result of bursted blood vessels, usually capillaries. When a capillary bursts, all that blood is now leaking out of the blood vessel and it spreads out around that area. And these aren't usually too bad. You get bruises all the time. Your body knows how to deal with it. It knows how to heal it. But that is why your skin turns purple, because it's turning purple because there's all that blood that is leaked out. Okay, moving on to the heart. Now, the heart, this is the big boy. The heart has the job of always pumping blood around the body. And it does this involuntarily. Now, I used that term in a previous video. Involuntary, I was talking about how your lungs breathe in and out involuntarily because you just do it automatically without thinking about it. The heart is just the same. It involuntarily pumps blood around the body. It does it without you thinking about it. It doesn't need the brain to tell it what to do. It will do it automatically. And the heart, it doesn't get tired because it's a cardiac muscle. Okay. Now, cardiac muscles respond to electrical signals, and your heart has a little node in it called the sinoatrial node. and it's better known as the pacemaker. It's a little node that helps actually tell the heart when to pump blood, and it forces it. It sends a electrical signal throughout the heart to pump. Now, the heart connects basically is the connection for our body to get to the lungs and back. It's the connection of the lungs and we have a connection that goes from lungs to heart to body to heart to lungs, and that circuit just goes and repeat. So here's it in a diagram. We get blood oxygenated blood brought in from the lungs, comes to the heart, and then goes back out to the body, and then goes back to the heart, and goes back into the lungs. And that cycle keeps on going. So this is how it works in mammals. And different animals have different types of body systems, as I've explained before, or as explained to my students before. Different types of animals will have different types of body systems, and the more complex the body system, the more complex the animal can be. Us mammals, we have this double system where we can have our heart split into two sections, where the heart deals with the lungs and the heart deals with the rest of the body. And that can be broken up. That can be due to how our heart has 4 different chambers. So different animals have different amounts of chambers in their hearts. Even bugs, they don't have much chambers at all. They don't really have any veins at all. All bugs have is the blood just diffuses through their bodies. Fish only have 2 chambers. Birds and reptiles and amphibians, they have 3. Us mammals, we have 4. Okay, 4 chambers. And by the end of this lesson, I want you guys to remember the 4 different chambers. All right, so the 4 different chambers is the right atrium, the right ventricle, the left atrium, and the left ventricle. And each chamber has a different purpose, or each chamber basically feeds blood in a different direction. Now, to best understand it, you can look at this diagram, but it's actually a pretty comprehensive diagram. I'm going to direct you guys to this diagram. So to best remember and best think about the purposes of the different cavities in our hearts, it's best to think about it as a whole and how the heart responds to the lungs and the body as a whole. So to explain what I mean, first you got to understand that blood flows into a heart through the atrium and out through a ventricle. Okay, blood goes in through an atrium, out through a ventricle. The blood enters through the left atrium. It first enters through the left atrium from the lungs, and then it comes out of the left ventricle and to the rest of the body. So that's oxygenated blood there. Now, remember before how I said veins are not classified as having deoxygenated blood? That's because this vessel here is heading towards the heart, yet it has oxygenated blood. Because it's going towards the heart, we call it a vein, but it's a vein that has oxygenated blood. No other veins have oxygenated blood apart from this one, and it's a special one called the pulmonary vein. Okay, so the pulmonary vein brings oxygenated blood into the left atrium, and then then that goes into the left ventricle, and that goes out into the rest of the body. It goes out through another special artery called the aorta. Okay, so the aorta is our biggest main artery, and that branches off into a whole lot of other little arteries. Okay, so we got a few names that you got to remember. The pulmonary vein that goes to the left atrium, to the left ventricle, and then out through the aorta. Okay, now we got all our deoxygenated blood throughout the body that needs to return back to the heart, so it can go back into the lungs, and we can get rid of that carbon dioxide. So all that deoxygenated blood goes through the veins through our main vein called the vena cava. So the vena cava is basically the opposite of the aorta. So the aorta is the main artery that goes to the body. The vena cava are the main veins that go towards, and they come from the body. So the vena cava come into the right atrium, which goes into the right ventricle, and that goes back into the pulmonary arteries, which go into the lungs here. Okay, so we got a cycle here. Pulmonary veins go into the left atrium, to the left ventricle, to the arteries, to the body, which comes back into the vena cava, to the right atrium, to the right ventricle, and then back into the pulmonary arteries. You guys do need to know this cycle, okay? You do need to know all these different names, vena cava and aorta. Remember, those two are just opposites. That's the main vein, that's the main artery. Pulmonary arteries and pulmonary veins are the one veins and arteries that don't have the blood it normally has. These are the only arteries with deoxygenated blood, and these are the only ones with oxygenated blood. You guys do need to remember all this, but once you remember it, it's a pattern that you should be able to remember. So yeah, that's the different components of the heart. One last component I'll mention is that there's also different little valves here. I'm not going to focus too much on that. One other part I'll mention is that the heart and these two cavities here, or these four cavities rather, the two sides of this heart is separated by the septum. Okay, that's one big wall right in the middle. So these two sides of the heart don't mix. We don't get deoxygenated blood mixing with oxygenated blood, because that would be bad. Now, when we talk about heartbeats, you probably recognize and associate heartbeats with electrocardiograms, or ECGs for short, or you basically would associate it with that little machine that goes beep, beep. You get the idea. These machines actually represent the different movements of different parts of our heart. So each little blip here represents a different cavity in our heart that's moving. So the first blip is when both the atriums contract, so that blood is moving from our atriums into our ventricles. And then this big blip is when the ventricles contract, forcing blood into our lungs or into our body. And then the third blip over here is when our heart muscles relax. So that's what each of these three blips actually mean, and they relate to those cavities that we talked about before. All right, so heart disease. What occurs with heart disease, or one of the ways heart disease can occur, is when your arteries get clogged up. Now remember, arteries have a higher pressure. So as soon as you start clogging up your arteries, as you see in this diagram, you can imagine it's so much harder to pump blood through your body. And as soon as the arteries are fully clogged, that artery might either burst, or maybe that blood pressure just pushes back, and it means there's a lot of blood pressure in your heart, and that can cause a heart attack. And that's really bad news. So that's how most heart diseases work, and they're usually linked to high cholesterol, as you'll see here. All right, I mentioned in a previous video that deoxygenated blood and oxygenated blood can be differentiated by the color. Here's an example of that. Deoxygenated blood is not blue. It's just a lighter red, okay? Now, we've covered different types of blood vessels, and we covered the different components of the heart. The last thing there is to cover is what blood is composed of. And we've covered this a little bit in specialized cells in the last topic, but I'll go over it pretty quickly. Blood is composed of red blood cells, which are made in bone marrow. Red blood cells, they're the ones that don't have a nucleus, and they're the ones that carry all the oxygen around the body. And they're the ones that carry everything. There's also white blood cells. They're like the big bodyguards of the blood system. They're the ones that fight off any any diseases there are. They're basically our immune response. There's also platelets. These guys are like the little workers that help to stop and clot blood. And then there's also plasma. Plasma is just all the liquid that all these things swim in. Okay, plasma is the liquid that makes up our blood. So to further explain platelets, platelets are the tiny little cells. Red blood cells and white blood cells are much bigger. But platelets they find a spot where there could be a cut in a blood vessel, say maybe where there's bruising, and they help to block up that cut. And they just gather up a bunch of cells and they block it up. And this is really important because that can help stop heart attacks and stop strokes. Anyway, that's today's lesson. There's going to be some information down below of what you got to do. But yeah, thanks for listening, guys.